Since the dawn of humanity, stories have passed down ancestral wisdom, knowledge, and inspiration from generation to generation. At the Global Landscapes Forum, we always try to continue this tradition, sharing stories that inspire, educate, and motivate action on environmental challenges. Filmmaking is a powerful way to tell these stories, revealing new perspectives through the lens of a camera and the vision of its creators. Today, we are here to ask if filmmaking can drive environmental change. And to explore this, we're joined by Ann-Kathrin Neureuther from the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the filmmaker Álvaro Álvarez, the human geographer Olivia del Giorgio, and the nature filmmaker Cecilia Mena, who joined the GLF community through a restoration road trip through the Tolima region in Colombia to learn from restoration practices. This documentary, The Invisible Corridor, will be screening at the end of this discussion. Welcome to this wonderful GLF Live, to our amazing guest, and to our speakers as well. To start, I'd like to ask our speakers, first of all, how do today's challenges such as deforestation, certification, rising temperatures, and biodiversity loss serve as a source of inspiration for your work? And how do you see filmmaking converging with these issues? And Catherine, let's start with you.
Sorry, classic, have to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. This is very exciting to be in this conversation and to know that so many of you are following on social media, even though I cannot see you right now. But yes, very, very much looking forward to this conversation. So all the challenges we are facing today, they can indeed seem immense and overwhelming. I think I am personally lucky enough as the communications manager for the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration that it is a topic that's intrinsically hopeful, that tells us, although a lot of destruction has happened, and of course not everything can be reversed, there's tipping points, we are also seeing a lot of evidence where there have been successes in having species return and having entire ecosystems return. And although that is not a global trend yet, those can be very inspiring. So the reason why we started with the films under the UN Decade, and I'll go into more detail later, is that we had the scientific launch report at the very beginning of the decade that found that countries had already promised to restore more than 1 billion hectares worldwide. I don't know what 1 billion hectares are, to be honest. We then did some calculations and found out it's an area larger than China. So that sounds very large. But while these commitments in itself were promising, they were also not very relatable to myself or everyday people, because we don't know where that restoration is happening, how it is happening, who is involved. And that's when we came up with the idea of awarding the best initiatives doing restoration. And one of the prizes, so to speak, they could win was this filmmaking to tell their story. And this is how the Restore documentary series came about. We're in the second season now, or we completed the second season, and we're looking forward to producing the third season very soon.
Thank you, Ann-Kathrin. The Restore documentary series is something that I will love to talk about it later. Alvaro, now I'd love to hear your thoughts next.
Thank you, Fan, and hello, everyone who is here on the panel. Hello, everyone who is listening. For me, first of all, I need to say something as a disclaimer. I'm pretty new to the climate challenges that are happening, even that might sound incredible, but I've been doing journalism and filmmaking for maybe 15 years, and I've just recently been looking into all the basically climate issues that we are, that's the biggest challenges we're facing. So for me, like personally, I've always focused on human stories, more social issues, even current affairs. But it has been lately in the last maybe 2 years that basically climate has basically to start intertwining, being intertwined in basically every story that we look at. So for me, it was a thing of like basically connecting all the issues that I've been covering for so many years and how they are intertwined and how they are connected to climate change and all the climate issues that we are facing. So for me, in a way, it was a way of kind of like discovering what some people call systems thinkings and the systemic issues that are basically interconnected. And that serves as an inspiration. So being able to tell human stories that are connected, not only to climate, but to social issues, to things about global south, things about connections between the North and the South. I'm originally from Argentina, so I'm always having a perspective from there. So for me, inspiration comes from how all the issues, social and climate, are connected, and how filmmaking serves as a pretty powerful storytelling to connect everything and to paint, I would say, a system perspective and a broad issue.
Thank you, Álvaro. Precisely, you were mentioning that interconnections or links between environmental and climate challenges and other social issues, that's key. And sometimes we get to do that through policy reports and all of these sort of things, but we need to find ways to, to translate that into easier ways for people to learn and to get access to that information. And definitely filmmaking is a powerful tool and a powerful way to do it. So even though you're new to this, you're more than welcome to join these cause, because we need more people advocating and sharing these amazing stories. Cecilia, now over to you. How do these challenges inspire your work, and how do you see filmmaking interacting with these challenges?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, I'm agree with you. I always try to think what motivates me to bring nature into the eyes of other people, right? What inspires me, and especially to take them to take action, right? That's one thing that we want. And that's been like the feeling that I've been trying to follow all these years that I started to work with nature, like how I felt at the beginning of this career, or this this career, like just seeing others, people content, what they make me feel about what they have to show me that I didn't know before. So I really always try to focus on that people that I admire, and especially I have like a motto that I always follow. That is a quote for Roger Payne, the biologist of whales, that he always says like the big challenge, like the real challenge, is to get the world to fall so in love with nature that we want to do everything to save the world, the nature, and all our landscapes and everything. So for me, it's exactly that. Like it's a huge challenge because awful things are happening around the world. Always, we have a lot of bad news all the time. The idea is to try to connect people with that. So once you are like, you connect with that, there's no way to look away. And of course, I think the cinema, photography, and images is like, it's a powerful tool that we have. Not always like denunciation, of course we can do that, but also to inspire and to showing hope to people. And maybe that's a challenge, that to see more beautiful things, to bring hope to people in different ways, in different screens, in cinema and photography, even in the apps that people and children use. That's one of the things that I want to talk like more. That is how is filmmaking also in education. I think that's a really important tool and super powerful too. So I think the challenge is to focus there and engage people, especially children, to encourage them to go and live the nature and feel it and know it better, so they can have more knowledge to want to take care also that.
Like that you mentioned, Cecilia, storytelling as a tool to teach new generations, children especially, on how to take action and to get inspired and motivated by the stories that that people are sharing out there. I think that's very powerful because it brings hope, and it brings also some sort of optimism to the cause, which is always important to have. Olivia, I also love to hear from you, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I also want to start with a disclaimer similar to Álvaro, but unlike him with the 10, 15 years of documentary work, my disclaimer is the exact inverse. I'm just starting off using it as a medium. So very, very early on in exploring its uses. But on my end, I'm doing my PhD. I'm doing research, human geography and land use sciences. And one of the big questions that has come up in working with people on the ground has been, my work, similar to investigative journalism or full on anyone that specializes in documentary work, is sort of the investigative research component of looking into these stories and having people share the stories. And a big question came up of, how do we translate the research products to something more accessible, not only globally, but also for the people that we work with on the ground. And imagery and the visual is so accessible and it's so transparent too, compared to other mediums. And also, I think invokes a lot of empathy. So I think similar to what the other speakers have said, it's a way to engage an audience and to make them connect with an issue that's experienced by people potentially thousands of kilometers away. So yeah, we're dabbling in that now, to try to communicate some of the issues faced on the ground in the regions I work with.
Very powerful to have a way to precisely translate research products into something accessible and to reach a vast majority of people. And also to hear from you what inspires you and what brings you to work in the field of filmmaking, but linking the environmental and climate issues to all of this. So to our audience, I also would love to ask you that, what inspires you? What brings you hope? And in what way are you working towards these issues as well? Now, Ann-Kathrin, I want to talk to you a little bit about this initiative that you mentioned during the introduction, which is a UN Decade on Restoration documentary series called Restore. You already mentioned that you are going already with the second season of this series, which I highly recommended to watch. I'll be watching a couple of them last week. It's very informative. And my question for this is, how do you and your team ensure that the message remain helpful and inspiring, even when dealing with challenging issues such as the one that we mentioned?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, to talk about the Restore series again a little bit, I think the luxury that I have there, but sometimes it's also a challenge, is that it's not a film series alone, but it's embedded in this international process, basically, of us wanting to find the best large-scale examples of restoration to showcase to other countries what is already working. In some cases, that also includes financial aid if the restoration is happening in developing countries, for example. In some cases, it's more the outreach and the recognition, but basically we want to build something like the World Heritage Sites just focused on the future. So these are the UN World Restoration Flagships, where we're saying these are the areas that the world should pay attention to, where species are already returning, where ecosystems are regrowing, where corals are bouncing back or proving at least to be resilient, and so on. And so for this, we're putting out calls to countries worldwide, but also to organizations to show us where they restore and to show us their best success stories and how they go about it. That can range from really big initiatives like the Great Green Wall to really community-driven things like the Trinational Atlantic Forest that brings together 300 community-based organizations across the Atlantic coast of South America to bring back that ecosystem. And so I have a vast support system of scientists and program officers and so on evaluating these initiatives. But then we said film is very important because it can't just be about the numbers. We as humans make a lot of our decisions based on emotions. We make fast decisions that are based on some observations or some impressions we have. Not everything is logical. I think you mentioned it before that since the beginning of civilization, humans have told stories to each other. I mean, that's how fairy tales came about, to pass on lessons that they learned. So this is how we select the World Restoration Flagship. So I have the luxury that these are already successful stories, but then I have the challenge of how to bring it into film and how to take some of these really big restoration drives and package it into stories that are relatable. So that would be my advice number one: make it relatable, and don't be afraid to maybe cut down a big initiative into more tangible pieces that relate to an audience. I think that's what we're seeing often with climate change, but also with wars or conflicts and other big challenges, that sometimes if we're not in the situation ourselves, there's this tendency of othering. You know, if I'm not in a community in the Amazon, I may be believing, okay, these are people facing large challenges and they're fundamentally different from me as a human, which is not true. So we also try in our films to bring in the human perspective, to show these are humans just like you. They are in these challenging situations. So making it relatable, finding some humor, some anecdotes in them is really helpful. Just to bring up one example, and this is one of the films I would actually really recommend for people to watch. It's Restore the High Andes, where we're talking about a restoration drive to restore mountain ecosystems across 6 countries in the Andes, which are very important for global climate, global water. But we focus on a friendship between 2 people, between an indigenous biologist who comes from the Andes himself, and then a supporter he met along the way, who then teamed up and helped with fundraising and built this big initiative. And one of the lines that really sticks with me is how Tino, who's our indigenous protagonist, says, well, and then this gringuito came along and he wants to tell me about tree planting, which is a very humorous line, but it also speaks to the friendship they have, the special relationship that they have. And without having to say it, we package this relationship. And these lines tell us nothing about tree planting, but it makes us more relatable to these characters. So these would be 2 lessons. But then also to wrap it up a bit, maybe counterintuitive to your question, what we're also trying to do is to not only sell hope, but to not shy away from conflict either. Because if we're going out there and we're saying, oh yeah, restoring trees, it's a solution, it provides jobs and animals are coming back and it's good for people and the economy and health and so on, then honestly, the audience would think, okay, if it's so good, why is it not happening? So we also want to show the complexity a bit and show what are the pitfalls, when did initiatives fail, and what did they learn from it. So in every episode of Restore, we kind of have the rough outline when we go about finding a story. What's the challenge? What's the solution or the first solution? What did people learn along the way, or why did this first solution not work? Then how did they pivot? And then maybe how did they pivot again? So this way people can follow along the journey and emphasize with the characters, but also draw in all these lessons. Because I think if you present it as too simple, then yeah, you strip away the lessons, and it's also less believable, because our world is not simple.
We have to keep it real, but also make it relatable and showcase the real challenges, the failures, and the experiences, the learnings from all of this. And you know, we cannot sugarcoat the climate emergency that we're living in. So I definitely agree with you on the fact that we need to be real and how we are having these conversations, given the urgency of these challenges. That's because of the GLF. We recently also hosted different lives about certain topics. And one of them, Álvaro, is about one topic that you produced with the BBC. It's a documentary. So we hosted a GLF Live about degrowth, and it turns out that you work on this on a documentary called Less is More. Can degrowth save the world? And knowing that this topic can be challenging to discuss, as we already addressed it with Ann-Kathrin, how do you ensure that the message remain as equally inspiring but realistic, even when you're dealing with these problematics, with these topics that are hard to or difficult to address, given the sensitivity of a topic such as degrowth.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Fran. I just want to also comment on one thing that Ann-Kathrin was saying, which I agree with, which is keep things inspiring, but keep them real. And we should keep saying what is wrong, who is responsible, and how can we make things happen in terms of changes. I think that the leitmotif of we need change needs to be there, and we need to actually address the things that are still wrong. Not saying constantly doom and gloom, but I think we should keep that in mind. Yeah, the degrowth dog, it was super interesting. As you can imagine, is a very, very complex issue, and it's a very difficult issue basically to translate into visuals. For me, I cheated a little bit. So what I did was I basically focused on Barcelona, which Barcelona is, surprisingly for me, is a place where a lot of the academia and a lot of academics that work on degrowth and post-growth are based here. For me, it was very surprising and convenient because I am partly based here. So I just had to grab a camera and go talk to them. So I grabbed the camera and I went to talk to them. I had incredible conversations for hours with so many people who were mostly academics. And then I figured, well, I cannot show just talking heads. That's not what I do. I don't do talking head documentaries because I don't think they are engaging enough. So then I said, okay, so I'm going to narrow it down to Barcelona, which is a very beautiful city, which helps. And I will also try and find tangible, like Ann-Kathrin was saying, tangible solutions and things that are happening in the city that connect to both degrowth, post-growth, and the well-being economy. So I don't know if some of you might know Barcelona is a place where it has a very strong history on alternative organizations, alternative economics related to climate change, related to social issues. And there were a lot of examples for me to hear, to go film and to basically talk about. Some of them where there's a lot of regenerative agriculture examples here in the city, outside of the city. So I went to talk to someone who was into degrowth and permaculture, and they were actually showing me the country house and how they're doing things in a cooperative way and how they are working with different cooperatives in the local level. I went to see a net zero housing cooperative, which was super interesting as well, and shows a little bit of the power of people, of how change happens when people basically are given the tools, the means, and the resources to make the decisions for themselves, which in something like housing is incredible that we don't have that power as common people. And yeah, so for me, it was a challenge of basically putting these theories or theoretical things into visuals. And as I said, for me, the showing the examples, showing the people behind those examples, and actually just taking some time to go and see tangible things that are happening right now that are there. There are solutions out there. We just need to go and show them and basically amplify the possibilities.
Wonderful, Álvaro. Definitely, it's such a challenge to try to not only translate things into an easier way to communicate for people and for broader audiences, but also to try and have that scientific or at least academic knowledge in the background, sustaining or supporting the statement or the things that we are giving into the world. Now, I want to move to Cecilia and ask you, given the fact that you've been working in filmmaking, photographing, and documentary series, what inspired you to start telling stories through documentaries, particularly on these environmental and social issues and topics?
Yeah, for me, it's always like this challenge that I've been talking about, like to share the feeling and experience of being in nature through my lens and through a screen. That sometimes is a big challenge, especially if you want to also talk about science or facts, or try to talk about something that is not really nice. Like you say, I'm completely agree. Like we have to stick to the thing that bad things happens, but also try to bring hope. So it's like a balance, hard to manage sometimes. But yeah, since I was lucky to grow up and surrounded by nature and to experience those feelings like by myself, when I started working with nature and with the visual world, with photography or whatever, I was like, at the beginning, I was frustrated because I was thinking it's hard to make like people feel the same connection just looking at the screen, right? Because that's something that happened usually. Like you just in an amazing landscape, sunset in the forest, and then you take a picture and you say like, oh, this is not what I'm feeling in this moment. So it's I don't know, it's not real, so it's hard. And sometimes I don't know if maybe in the creative process it's like we don't believe in our creations, but just we have to keep in mind that everyone, I think we always think that everyone has the chance to access to those some places, to nature places, but that's not true. Some people don't even realize that they have an amazing spot nearby, or they might have like native trees right in their backyard. Like that happened a lot. I work with a reserve in Argentina, and sometimes we just upload pictures about native trees, and just people answer like, hey, I have the tree in my yard, and I was like almost take it to build a house, but I didn't know it's important to keep it. So sometimes we just don't know that maybe that the thing that we can make a picture or a movie with that, maybe it's new knowledge for other people. And of course, there are more and less like privileged places with nature spaces, and some communities already understand how and why they need to take care or protect. So telling stories for me, it's always be a challenge in that way. But after all, I realized that even sometimes I felt like insecure about my perspective of what I have to show. It's always kind of a way to spark this curiosity to some people. And even today that we talk about technology and new technology and how a new generation use the apps and the phones, we not always have the control to know when or how our message can get through other people. And that maybe it's a start for other movement, other thing, other action. And yeah, maybe it's someone who's also trying to connect with nature in some way, and then they see something that you do or that your community do, and they start a community project to protect their land or discover tools that they don't even know to exist to do for something better for the world and for the nature places. And sometimes we don't know, but maybe we are inspired people without we even know, just with our lens. So yeah.
I love that thing that you mentioned, that despite insecurities, pretty much everything is about to spark that little flame within the hearts of people, and to to make them realize, to make us realize that there's a wonderful ecosystem around, a wonderful world, and a wonderful future that is worth fighting for. And because of that, sometimes we need to have the real conversation to showcase these real issues, as we've been talking extensively. And that's why I want to move to the bridge between local stories and global awareness. Olivia, you recently finished a documentary called At the Edge of the Forest. It's a film showcasing the Gran Chaco, that's in South America. It's a dry woodland, and the challenges that are being faced by the people living there. In your experience, how did these films, sort of documentaries, create this bridge that I was mentioning, between local stories and global awareness?
Thanks, Francisco. Yeah, it's such a good question, and I think actually this is part of the answering of that in some ways. It's something that is ongoing in terms of my discovery of this process and how to visibilize some of the things happening on the ground. And I think panels such as this one and different film festivals are ways to get it across. But the process is very much ongoing. So I'm speaking from an experience that I'm that I'm very actively learning from. But the bridge, the local to global bridge, or even local to national bridge, it's in my experience specifically with the short doc stemmed from the people that I work with asking the question of why they haven't been listened to or why they haven't been heard. And I think it also comes back to the question or the issue that we've heard prompted by the different speakers that I also completely resonate with, right? Of we can try to, and it is important to pitch these stories from a perspective of hopefulness, but it's also very important to recognize that there are extreme injustices and challenges being faced by people that we can't sugarcoat. And in this case, it's also trying to find a balance between correctly representing the notion of agency and the fact that people have fought for decades on their own right without any help whatsoever, but the disconnect that's happened between that fight and that resistance versus the actual visibility that resistance has gotten to some of these environmental injustices. So in collaboration with the people that I'm working with, the documentary came from this idea of trying to exactly that bridge that disconnect, right? Of getting the questions that they're asking of why what's still happening to them still happening, a bit more, or hopefully a lot more visibility. And to add to that, I think that the question of environmental injustice, of inequalities that are happening, a lot of the externalities that we're seeing, and the topic of discussion on desertification, climate change, et cetera, a lot of those externalities are being channeled into specific spaces and places because of vulnerabilities and because of inequalities in. So the stories are also sometimes, I don't want to say necessarily purposefully, it depends the context, but the stories themselves can be invisibilized by virtue of the fact that many of the people that are facing these injustices are marginal minorities, et cetera. So I think film brings to this an element of transparency and an element of shedding light on issues that resonates with people, and that uncovers hopefully a bit of that black box in areas that are, for an X number of reasons, including corruption and economic instability, et cetera, not being properly looked at in terms of the lens that we shed critically globally at a global scale towards injustices.
Films shed a light on people. That's a quote, that's a phrase that I definitely resonate with, and that gives us that idea of how filmmaking, storytelling in general, can provide valuable information and insights for people out there and for audiences in general. Now I want to give you the floor to all of you so we can have a better understanding based on your experience, whether it's extensive or it's few. How can filmmakers or storytellers contribute to the conversation and create impactful films on these topics? Now, I'm asking this because we know that activists, for example, they engage and they try to advocate towards certain causes. Academics and scientists, they do provide valuable information to policymakers and decision makers in order to create better policies for conservation and for a better governance in the international climate policy fields and in general on each territory. And we have filmmakers providing on their own also some sort of inputs to these global agendas and to these global topics and challenges. So now, Ann-Kathrin, I would like to start with you. How can filmmakers or storytellers contribute to the conversation on creating impactful films and in these topics?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a good one to kind of summarize what has been said already in this conversation. I want to go back to something Cecilia said earlier. I think that we, as filmmakers or film producers, also need to be aware that we exist in a vast ecosystem of information. Like everyone has the sum of human knowledge basically at their fingertips. Now we also have the sum of artificial knowledge. So I don't know that if that makes things easier or complicates things, but we should be very aware of that ecosystem, like where our film stands, what other materials, what other information alleys are available to people, and that hopefully makes it easier to not try to have the film as capture all, to want to show everything, to overload the audience with information, but rather to have the courage as well to trust the storytelling and cut down on a story and find the interesting nuggets. Because I think if we do that, then we can do two very powerful things. One is grabbing the audience emotionally, which is very important for motivation, for just the information, the motivation to act. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that the film conveys a specific restoration technique, for example, although there could also be how to do it videos that do that, but really it's the emotion and the motivation. And then secondly, as I said before, the empathy, to see that the people facing these situations are struggling with environmental degradation. They just humans as we are, and they also have their everyday worries, and there's no such thing as first world problems and third world problems. I really hated that trend because it was in a way dehumanizing. And so I think films have a really important role to play in getting to that empathy.
Thank you, Ann-Kathrin. Definitely, that is something that we need to take into consideration when creating and crafting those stories and sharing it to the world. Our audience out there, I would like to invite you to ask some questions to our speakers. Let's take advantage of this opportunity to have this knowledge for us. And now I want to pass it over to Álvaro. How can how can filmmakers or storytellers contribute to the conversation in creating impactful stories in films on these topics?
Well, the how, I don't know, and I think we're all trying to figure it out. And it's okay to recognize that, and it's okay to do these things and kind of try to figure out how to do it and how to keep pushing for it. What I can say is I feel that there is a huge gap between what science is telling us and what the general mindset out there, the collective mindset is. I think there is a huge gap, which I think we have the responsibility at least to try to bridge. So I'm having constant conversations now with a lot of people, mostly academics, but also activists, who are, saying, how can we get the message across? How can we reach audiences? How can we make people understand that what we have been seeing for decades is happening right now? I think it's a very difficult task. I think the powers that be and the people that want the things to keep going as they are have also a lot of resources and a lot of means to counter a lot of the messages that we're trying to put out. So I think we have to be strategic, but I do think that there is responsibility to change, to bridge the gap. But also I want to think that there is a momentum. I want to think that there is a little bit of a change of mindsets in people. I think hopefully if we push together, we can change some of the narratives that we have been told and we have been sold in the last 70, 80 years that are clearly bad for everybody. And I think people are not stupid. And I think people are slowly recognizing that there has to be a change, that there has to be a shift in the paradigm. You say in English, is that a word in English? Yes, I think so. So I think we need to keep pushing, and we need to be aware that we have a responsibility, and that right now I think there is an urgency and a very nice window of opportunity as well.
Wonderful. Definitely, there is a gap. So apologies. paraphrasing what you mentioned, there is a gap between science and collective mindset. That's why at the GLF, as the world's largest knowledge platform, connecting people with a shared vision to create solutions, to create productive, profitable, equitable, and resilient lands, we try to promote this bridge, basically, to reduce that gap. Now, Cecilia, I would love to hear from you on your thoughts on how can filmmakers or storytellers contribute to these conversations.
Yes, okay. I'm agree with you guys. I think everything has a point. And of course, I think also like we have this huge challenge and we have a lot of responsibility in the ways that we communicate. That's a challenge in journalism in general, filmmakers, photographers. We can decide how to show different things. I think as a freelancers in our social media with with different groups, scientists, and but also go with people in the lands, in the forests, where things happen actually. In long term, if we think that we have time, hopefully, I think I will always focus in education, and I believe that a film, a video, a message that speaks to the new generations and the content that they consume today can inspire action. We should do that. And I don't know, I recently saw a video of a Spanish author. She's from Madrid, and she's working to bring nature into schools, like really nature, not just like part of the curricula or just to some text. And she say that actually it's a fact. The more meaningful experience we have in nature as children, the more desire we will have to protect as adults when we grow. So I believe, of course, we're still on time. I believe that we can do a lot of things for better, and because those children are gonna be in the important position tomorrow. They're going to be making decisions. They will build the future that we want today, but maybe it's going to take a long time. So I think while we are just continue working, maybe working in this, building these schools full of nature, or try to bring people in the nature to give them knowledge, we can create a space to connect with through art, culture, cinema, photography, and other experience. And sometimes I feel this is our battleground, right? This is the place where we have to stay, to link between the people who is with their hands in the earth and the forests, in the oceans, and yeah, just propose these kind of talks also. And there are many ways to do this kind of thing. So in my point of view, I always gonna choose hope. And I believe that cinema should be a key from art to showcase nature in many places that we can. Schools, of course, is a good place to do that.
Remain hopeful and inspired, while at the same time sharing the present environmental and challenging issues that our generations are facing. It's absolutely crucial. Olivia, I want to pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that I think among all the other things that I'm pulling from the different speakers is that there tends to be this translation between filmmaking and research and science. Like Álvaro mentioning that you interviewed tons of different academics and policymakers. And Francisco, you mentioned too, right, that there's this the research informing the policy and the and I think that an important role in the filmmaking and the visual is in also using paraphrasing the bridging of that is making it more approachable and accessible, packaging it in a way that's that people can connect with, which we've already also touched on. But I think in many cases, going a step further, for example, from my position as a researcher, the ways that we have to present data and that we have to analyze data in a research context, and this then goes into feeding into policy and climate-driven policy, et cetera. it's quite dehumanizing, even, and in some ways it needs to be, right? It's data presented systematically, but the film brings back the human into those narratives, and I think that that's very important. You can present science and you can present data, and that's very important for X number of many reasons, but bringing the people and bringing the landscapes back into that is extremely important. So that's, I see a big role there and a big responsibility too on our part.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for that last input on this conversation. And I resonate with you and what all of the speakers just mentioned, especially when it comes to translating into bridging the gap, because it does not require many words to speak the truth. I think that's something that we explored during this GLF Live, especially when it comes to trying to translate the complex information to easier ways for people to understand, to learn, and to take action towards environmental and other social and economical issues. So I truly appreciate your inputs and your insights on this conversation. We have one question from our audience, and this individual is asking, telling their story can be a luxury for some people. How can we make spaces like filmmaking and storytelling more inclusive? I don't know if any of you wants to jump, or I select one of you. Let's go with Ann-Kathrin. We'll do a round of answers. Ann-Kathrin, your thoughts on this? How can we make spaces like filmmaking and storytelling more inclusive?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So thanks for asking it. And I think one that we should also approach critically. I don't have all the answers myself because there's many systemic issues as well. I mean, especially filmmaking is really resource intense, as every filmmaker can tell you what they spent their money on. I mean, there's equipment and just inputs that you need, and if it involves traveling as well. So I think it comes back to making spaces for young filmmakers, building these learning opportunities, but it doesn't have to start with film. I know a lot of filmmakers who actually started off studying something like Olivia as well, studying something completely different, and who all bring this quality, I think, that unites filmmakers, which is curiosity, wanting to find out more about a story, wanting to find out more about how to tell a story, which eventually can lead to a career or an avenue in filmmaking. So yeah, and what we do with a Restore series, for example, really practically, is that we always try to find the best local filmmakers, local teams. So I've produced 2 seasons now. I haven't been in one location. There's a 3rd season coming up, so we're not traveling ourselves. We're producing this. We're trying to find the stories. A lot is happening on Teams or Zoom, an infinite number of Teams or Zooms calls, but then we also try to find the right voices to tell the stories, which are often local filmmakers or filmmakers from the region who then can take on the story. So yeah.
I can bounce
Thank
off
you.
of linking to Ann-Kathrin's point, which I completely agree with. And I think going a step further, translating a lot of the research coming out of participatory conservation science frameworks, the same can be applied to filmmaking, in the sense that making it a more participatory process from the ground up, whether that's people on the ground being more involved in the narrative construction, right, of how what's being told, what are the questions asked in the context of the film, what are the images portrayed, how is it conveying the vision of, you have a privilege and a certain vision as a filmmaker. How is that translating to the vision of the people whose stories you're telling, to the extent of, I've heard of a couple of projects where there's funding for equipment for local communities to participate in the filming process. And I think that that's a really interesting direction to explore going forward.
Very valuable insights. Now, Álvaro, Cecilia, do you want to add something to what was just shared by Ann-Kathrin and Olivia? Yeah, that was very clever.
No,
Oh,
sorry.
you go.
No, sorry, just really short. I'm completely agree with the girls. Like, I think we can also start always to find stories that we have probably really near, and what things that we have. Like in my case, I start with that projects that I find really interesting, just really near to my house that I don't even know that exist. So that's also part of the challenge. And then, yeah, just we can find people who's doing the same, connect, build our networking, and work together. That's always work. That's another topic about restoration, like work in community, so we can do exchange. And just, I think, yeah, agree with the girls. It's just that.
Álvaro.
Yeah, I just wanted to just also very quickly, like, yeah, even though I've traveled to many places in my career, I always think that it's super important to have a local knowledge, to have local people that understand what's going on, to have people who have been there for a long time, which is impossible to learn or to acquire the experience in a place for years. And yeah, I think also with what Cecilia was saying, that just get out, go out, grab a camera, go out, like talk to people, see what's going on around your area. And at some point, maybe hopefully you will be involved in projects that that will be meaningful and important for you.
Get out, go out, bring stories to the table, try to share as many as you can. I think that's wonderful, Álvaro. Thank you for that. Thank you to all of our speakers. I appreciate your contribution, as it is absolutely impressive what we can do and achieve through filmmaking and storytelling, which is why the GLF announces today the Global Media Seminar for journalists and content creators to gain critical insights from leading media houses and research organizations, ahead of the 3 COPs, the 3 Rio conventions on biodiversity, climate change, and desertification. This is happening tomorrow. This event, this Global Media Seminar, is happening tomorrow, 16 and 17 of October, and it's available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So make sure to apply through the link that is in the chat of this live stream of this video. To close this conversation off, I would like to present the trailer that we speak about earlier, the documentary film called The Invisible Corridor, produced by Cecilia Mena for the TLF. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Thank you to our amazing speakers for joining us as well. And now, let's go and watch the trailer.
Pero sí podemos hacer una agricultura más sustentable y más amable con el ambiente, y que a la vez los beneficios de los sistemas naturales potencien la producción de alimentos y las actividades productivas.
No hay una legislación que proteja nuestros bosques, que proteja los árboles que tenemos, a los bosques nativos, y se sigue talando de manera excesiva. Al menos en el norte se ha talado mucho y se sigue talando. Esto está conllevando a que perdamos biodiversidad, porque no solo se pierden bosques, se pierde todas las especies que están dentro del bosque, ¿no? Y seguramente muchas especies endémicas que solo están en un solo lugar.
La restauración puede ser una herramienta para atender diferentes desafíos que estamos enfrentando como sociedad, y ser básicamente una solución basada en la naturaleza integral que permita tanto mejorar las condiciones ambientales, sociales y económicas de comunidades vulnerabilizadas.
Y que hay que ser optimistas, que los cambios se pueden siempre y cuando trabajemos entre todos. Y tenemos un común denominador, y se llama naturaleza. se llama apreciación de los paisajes, se llama conciencia. O sea, la verdad son varios comunes, pero de eso se trata, el trabajo en comunidad.